Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I just heard that the president is so busy that he is not here, so I will start the session myself. I'm Menno-Jan Kraak, and I will not give more introductions, but I would like to start with my keynote. It's titled Open Map Knowledge, ICA's Contributions to the SDGs. What I would like to do is in 3 chapters, so to say, talk about the book. But I have to say that those of you who follow the conference online have already been flooded with other colleagues who have been talking about the book, and also later today they will talk more about the book. So only do the headlines. It's on. Okay, I'll put it closer. Yeah, it's better? Oh, okay. So without the president, everything goes wrong, as you can imagine. So here we go. So, okay, one section of my talk will be about the book. Then I would like to say a few words related to open science and open educational resources, because that's very much what is linked to our book. And then at the end, I would like to think aloud with you about what I call open map knowledge. So first, the book. Those of you who are, have a memory, they might remember that in 2015, we had a workshop with the chairs of all the commissions. And at that time, we were working on posters related to the SDGs. So every commission took adopted a SDG and created a poster. And these posters were exhibited at the headquarters of the UN in New York, at the conference of the UN GGIM, and that was successful. And based on that success, we started to think of, okay, we have to elaborate this further, and maybe it's a good idea to write a book. And my first idea was to follow the same formula, working with all the commissions together. But I changed my idea because, yeah, working with 27 commissions, trying to get some unity in the stories, having to chase people. And those of you who know, if you send out an email to 20 people, maybe 3 reply. So, okay, if you can predict nightmares, you try to avoid them. So we composed a kind of editorial team. Idea is now that my slides continue, but oh, here we go. An editorial team was made up of my colleagues of the UN, Ayako Kagawa and Guillaume Le Sourd, and my colleagues from Wisconsin University in Madison, and Rob Roth was the main representative here, and from the University of Twente ITC, it was Britta Ricker and myself. And with each of those 3 locations, we had many people, let's say, behind us who also did lots of work. And then at the beginning of this year, we were able to publish the book first online. And those of you who are here at the conference also received a hard copy. And personally, I prefer that because smelling a book is much better than swiping a book. But okay, that's my personal opinion. I'm pretty old-fashioned here. Okay, but I would also like to look into the future. What can we do with the book? Because now this resource is here, and I think that's far more important now to think of the future. So if you think of how we conceptualize the book, then those of you who have seen it, there is always one topic on 2 pages. We try to limit the text to 500 words. It's well illustrated, so to say. There are all kinds of links to internal sections. There are links to the glossary. We follow the kind of, what we call the atlas spread. We had 4 columns for the text. But actually at the background, there are 8 columns, so you can play around with the figures. And that story has been told by Rob Roth yesterday. So that's the idea, and this goes throughout the whole book. Then the content is split in 4 sections. So we have one section based on the geospatial data related to the SDGs, one on map design considerations, then all the maps and diagrams we have available, and of course the map use environment. Of course, you should also realize when you develop such a book, you make many choices, because again, it's a small book, both in size and in content, so to say. So it will never be able to cover everything. So we made all kinds of choices. So we decided not to include references. We decided that we approached the discipline from a, let's call it user perspective, in the sense, okay, more a geographical user perspective. So some sections, and there have been some discussions on, for instance, map projections that got attention, but maybe not the attention a geodesist would prefer. So deliberate choices. You have to, because yeah, otherwise you will never finish a book. So let's quickly look into those 4 sections. So when it came to finding the data, we tried to work with real SDG data. So we used the SDG database, online database of the UN Statistics Office as our data source. And that was interesting because yeah, many data are missing. Even during the process, data changed. And Rob and both Britta talked about it before, so that there's already, let's say, yeah, improvement of the data. But sometimes that was difficult for us because later during the process, we would like to improve a map and then we couldn't find our original data anymore. Okay, and when we had the data, we looked at it, we analyzed the data because again, you want to know more about it before you can map it. And then of course, we made many maps. But while making these maps, we also have to, yeah, worry or ask ourselves, what do we see? And maybe as cartographers, we know what we see because we created these maps, but do the users see what we want them to see? And I come back to this question later during my presentation. Okay, then these map design considerations. So there's a kind of whole workflow on the left, the whole process, and a small example which you can find in the book. In this case, a workflow which should lead for in a map for children related to the availability of water for people on the globe. Working on these design considerations and the data, we had let's call it a big fight with the indicator data. I mean, there are 233 indicators. Now and then there's one more and one less during the process. Every half year, the UN makes progress and things change. So basically the idea is to have these data on tier 1, meaning that everybody knows what it is and everybody agrees what it is. So that's the dark blue in the top bar. And then there is the light blue, that's a tier 1. So that's, they know what they want, but they don't agree or they don't have it yet. And then there are a few they know they need, but they have no idea. And of the dark blue ones, we decided to analyze them and decide, okay, what's the character? Is it absolute data, relative data? Is it index data, etc.? So we try to find out because, of course, that decides how you can map it. And then when it comes to this mapping, we discussed quite a few map types. We discussed all kinds of diagrams. And of course, we also offer them together in a combined diagram map visualization environment, because again, I think that those two, they really strengthen each other. Here are a few examples. This is the example of the DAS symmetric map, and this has been extensively discussed in the contribution of Britta Ricker during her presentation. Then the map environments, of course, we designed the maps for the book, so that's on paper, but also we gave attention to other environments, working in an exploratory desktop environment, for instance, or using them on a mobile phone. And again, we gave examples of this environment, let's say in a kind of dashboard environments, but also spending attention to the user. It's always the user-centered design ID, and we also try to bring that in the book. So at the end, we created many new figures, original new figures and maps. So we had 94 new maps, 86 schematic maps, 35 diagrams, and 30 other figures. So yes, if you put them all together, even we were impressed. Okay, so something about the workflow. So how do you write a book like this together? So, okay, we had our editorial team. We had an idea about topics. We had authors, and there we go. So with these topics in mind, we started to think of the data to collect. We had to clean this data. Then on the one hand, you were writing the text, and on the other hand, you were designing and creating the diagrams which belong with the text. But again, as I told you, fighting with the data is a kind of iterative process, so that goes up and down, so to say. After each of us had finished a kind of chapter, we sent it to our co-authors who did a critical review. That, of course, resulted in feedback loops because nobody is perfect. And also, it's typical, but it's really true that there is a difference in how we look at cartography in North America and in Europe. And we had to bring these school of thoughts together in a single story. And so even we had different views on how to map things. And that's really related to how we have been educated, so to say. And that was also a fascinating process. After that, the result went to the UN. And we had two checks. There was a textual check. So they want to go for British English. And they have certain rules. And the most fascinating rule, I mean, you remember the small columns, was that the word United Nations may only appear together, those two words, on a single line. So you cannot have on one line United, on the next line Nations. And we had that. And then we had to correct this. And that's often meant quite some wordsmithing to get our idea across to make it run. And thank Rob, because he's native and I'm not native, so he did this. Also, the maps went to the, we jokingly call it the map sensor, because the UN has a certain perspective on borders, and we had to adhere to their views on borders. And at the end, if you know how it works, then it's easy to do this. Of course, feedback loops. And then again, it went to the page layout. That all happened in Madison, and Rob explained how that worked yesterday. And then at the end, there's the book. Two products. We have the online book in the iLibrary, and you can download the PDF there. You see the web link here. And of course, there's the physical book, and there you have to realize that you have a unique book in your hands, or in your bag, or in your room, or maybe you throw it away already. But somewhere you had a chance to have it, because it's only printed for the conference. And it's only printed for a few other conferences where ICA thinks that they would like to impress people. So it's a kind of business card of ICA to give away the physical copy. And the reason for this is that the UN, I mean, they have their interesting rules. We wanted to make it free. But the UN bookshop doesn't sell books for free. So, and if you don't charge a price, you don't get an ISBN number. So, interesting. Okay, so let's concentrate on what's next, because we have many plans. We would like to translate the book in the 6 official languages of the UN. Now, the Canadians already have offered to do the French. So we are now working on this, on how to do this. And then you can say, maybe someone here who's speaking Arabic and say, I want to do Arabic. And of course, we would like to talk. But you have to realize that then also, again, everything has to fit in these columns. We have to go in InDesign. Who's going to do this? I mean, yeah, we can do it, but with time. So we have to discuss. And also, again, the UN wants to counter-read everything we do in these other languages to be sure that what is written is correct, so to say. Still, if there are people in those languages who are interested, please contact me, because I certainly, we have to sort out the workflow, but it would be great to end up with books in at least in the 6 official languages. And of course, if there are people in the room who would like to do it in their own language, well, no one will stop you, of course. Because all the material, everything is online available in a GitHub, all the data, all the pictures, everything usable. Okay, but then the book, I told you we made selections. And because the indicator data are mainly numbers by country, it's enumeration district. So we don't do anything with topographic maps. We don't do anything with non-enumeration data. We do very limited things with advanced technology like VR, AR, and stuff like this. And we don't do anything with map ethics. I mean, I use the Mercator projection here, and there is this right and wrong. And of course, every projection should be used in its own context. So that's what we should remember. And there is more behind this map. I come back to that. Of course, what would also be very nice is if these maps would be online in an interactive environment. So for instance, if you see this, then it will be interesting to play with the timeline and see how things change over time. Or maybe if you want to re-express your map from a proportional symbol map to a cartogram, that this happens when you click the buttons. And how about selecting that indeed everything highlights in the other maps? I mean, I still have many dreams. Another thing, but that's not necessarily linked to the book, but more to the whole idea behind this, is that we would like to bring it from global to local, because we have now made all kinds of maps covering the whole world. But it would be fantastic if at the end you end up in the street, that people realize and contribute to the SDGs. I mean, imagine that if you would be able to tell your students or your children, okay, if you switch off the light when you leave the room, you contribute to SDG, I don't know the number, 13 or whatever. I think that would be great. And that means that, the data which we now have, one number for each country, you can imagine that especially in the census bureaus, they might go down to block or lowest unit and then try to talk to people. Also the use of the book. I mean, now we have it. Who's going to use it? Well, as we said, we developed it especially for the UN, because they actually, and people who work with the indicator data. And in the UN, there are all kinds of developments related to this, what they call integrated geospatial information framework, a kind of successor of the SDI, as they claim, and the global statistical geospatial framework, where statistics and geo are brought together. And of course, a map is exactly that. And in the UN, there's also what they call the UN Geospatial Network. And there are all the organizations within the UN who use geospatial data. And we have already been giving a webinar for that group introducing the book. And that's how ICA can help. And you also had that we can give and use this material to give dedicated courses, that we give workshops and webinars. And we already have some plans for Cape Town, 1.5 years, to do something like this. But again, if you see an opportunity to use the material and to do something, please contact us. Another idea is to create an SDG indicator atlas. And we discussed this yesterday with the Atlas Commission. But please don't think of an atlas which has 233 pages, one map for each indicator. No, because that's very boring. And some of these are already somehow out there. No, it should be, okay, again, thinking aloud, it should be something that is a showcase of what we as cartographers can do. So we have all kinds of different, maybe interactive, multi-representations of the indicators. We can zoom in for one indicator to this region as an example. We zoom into another indicator for that region. You put it in the context. It would be great if it's auto-updated. I'll come back to that later. So again, and you should, the whole history of these lines. I mean, I can imagine all kinds of things. So not an ordinary atlas, although they are fun too. Okay, that's the book. Of course, I have to be my own timekeeper. That's difficult. So having thought of having now this resource available, then how can we put it in a context? And here what I would like to talk about is a little bit about open science and open educational resources. I think those of you who are working in academia, they know that these keywords, they are hot, so to say. I mean, our university has now put out a policy that from next summer we have to publish open source only. So no other option, just as an example. Okay, open science. I went to the UNESCO website. They have all kind of working groups working on this and all kind of definitions. And so why open science? Well, of course, you want to increase scientific collaboration and sharing of knowledge. And that means that you would like to make this knowledge openly available, accessible, reusable. And also that you are able to spread your knowledge to other related groups, also beyond the scientific community. But then this reusable, and it's very interesting, this conference, I've heard many presentations which link to many of the ideas somehow which I talk about. All snippets, which somehow we should somehow as ICA bring together, because this reusable and reproducibility, because my colleagues in geoinformatics talk about the technology, so if a student finishes his work, you give them the data and they have a model, then if you apply the model with the same data, you should have the same results. But now I'm a cartographer and we have art and science. So again, here's our art. But this is cartographer A. Here is cartographer B. And you can go through the whole alphabet and you have 26 good maps. So this reproducibility of the design of the cosmetics of the maps, that's an interesting thing. That probably is not reproducible. Okay, it's a matter how you define all these things, but just a first thought. I think that's something to think of. And it's also the beauty, because everything looking the same is very boring. Okay, open science again. So the green boxes indicate the main elements of open science, that there is an open science infrastructure, that you have tools available, that everybody is involved, that you can talk to each other, that you communicate, and this open scientific knowledge. I would like to look at this middle column first. And in doing so, I looked at, okay, which of these 5 have we contributed now with the book? And the last 2, but yes, we published the book, here we go. We made all the data available. I mean, not only we, but also the UN has all the data available, and we made the maps available. And also, by the way, the boundary files will also be made available. So I think that's for the UN, that's a big step. And it will happen in spring, that's the plan. Because then again, they show boundaries. So they make choices. Not everybody is happy with all the choices, still. And yeah, we made available all kind of open educational resources. I mean, yesterday I presented something on concept maps and in a learning environment using the book, but again, also the lessons presented later today by one of Rob's students, Lily Houtman, where QGIS lessons are made available and open. Those are other examples. And this open science communication is being done by the UN. They have published in December, at one point, every day, 1 SDG with a map like this. So they made their own poster, so to say. But if you look in the book, in between the sections, you have some of these in-betweens, we call them internally, and they show some of these posters. But they have created them for each of the SDGs. And they spread that news within their network. Here's an example of the QGIS instructions I've been talking about. And more details this afternoon. This is an idea of the, putting the whole book, the content, the pictures, the text, the glossary into a kind of, what we call open learning environment. So people can, follow a certain path to learn, and teachers can check what students have studied and what still is missing and where there are problems, etc. Then, at the moment, there's also a working group very active on working on the cartographic body of knowledge. And we have made our glossary available to the working group, and they already put it on their website. And If they will use it at the end after all kind of discussions, I don't know, but it's important. Give them the resources. And of course, there are other resources out there. And then at the end, we will create, as I say, a body of knowledge. I think that's important. Okay. Yes, now my thinking aloud part starts. So, and that's what the open map knowledge. Because that's all related to this question. What do we see? And Britta, in her talk yesterday, when she talked about the dasymmetric map, also discussed this a little bit, because again, this is about forest coverage in the world. And the darker, the more, and in this case, the dark one goes over 50%. So if we zoom in on this region, Middle Africa, and these in this map, these are the regions which were developed by the UN in, I think, the 60s. Yeah, to have, let's call it equal areas in the sense of equal number of people spread over the world, so they would have statistically comparable areas. So they grouped it based on this. So that's the background of why these regions are there. But then again, if we zoom in, and for instance in Chad, you can see that Chad has only 3% forest coverage. But on the global map, it's clear that it looks as if it's 50. So if people look at this world map, do they realize that what they see might not be the truth or might not be what's there? Of course, this is a well-known problem in geography, that if you play with different scales and different enumeration levels, that you can have this issue. But we realize this. But does our audience? And therefore, my idea is, okay, maybe we should try to help them. Because we think as cartographers, we can make the map, best map for that particular problem, that particular issue with that particular data. And then the question is, do our users understand our good intentions? And I'm not convinced. I know I have no scientific data to back me up in my, I'm thinking aloud, so I have no scientific backup of this. So I think they don't always see this. And probably if I would have shown this world map to the participants here, I doubt if everyone would realize what they see. So the question is, can we help as cartographers? Yes. Well, I'm optimistic by nature, so yes. How? Well, then this open map knowledge comes in. So my idea is, okay, let's first discuss why would we like to help them, and what, and then the how. So at the end, what we would like to do is that we improve the understanding of the user in what they see. Think of this world map. Then what would be nice if we could make our integrated cartographic knowledge available to the user who's looking at the maps. And how? Well, that's just my idea, but hopefully you have other brilliant ideas and we can combine this. I now will play with interactive annotations in the map. And I thought of different categories of how we could help. So I think on the one hand, we might tell, and again, each of what you see here, you might find examples somewhere out there. So I'm not so original. I just package it nicely. So data, so you can think of, and I give examples of each. You can think of the data, tell them what data is behind the map, tell them a little bit about what map representation they look at, what are the pros and the cons, what are the traps, what's the story of the data. We talk about story mapping is probably the hottest keyword at the conference. You hear it in every paper almost. But also there is still the functionality of the environment where the map is being used. And then I would still like to point to this ethics. Okay, let me illustrate them by 3 maps I created. Well, the book, 3 maps from the book. But before I do so, I would like to show you this annotation ID. So basically, you see in the upper right, you see 2 pages from the book, and it's about the project planning. And we look at this figure with the circle the process. And the gray table, you can translate it and you can add it to the circle because, yeah, these are the keywords. But then often in these diagrams, it's far more interesting to know what happens at the arrows than what happens in the boxes. Because the arrows, they are, let's say, yeah. And of course, you could annotate this. You could, yeah, I mean, let me try, you cannot read it, it's too small print, but one of them is related to execute the map design. And then you have to select your projection, you have to select symbolism, you have to select your map type, your visual variables, well, the whole suite of tools we have available. And every choice is an option to make a mistake. And that's in this whole circle. So again, everywhere we can go wrong. And yeah, I mean, if you teach your students, maybe it's an idea. Yeah, and of course you always best learn by example. So yeah, if I have an exam for my students, I present them with a wrong map, and they have to tell me what's wrong. Because if they can tell me what's wrong, they know how it should work. And that's pretty easy because just 2-3 weeks before an exam, I just scissor maps from my newspaper, and I have examples for my exam. It gets more difficult because the people making the maps for newspapers get better and better. So again, annotations, basic principle. Then the map. Here we look at the map of Africa, and I will address 3 of these annotation categories. So of course you can highlight the data, and you see many of these maps where this already happens. Even in our book, in these in-betweens, we have highlighted the extreme heights and low values, so just to show where the extremes are in the map. And you can do it like this. I mean, I did it like this in the context of the software I use to create this presentation, but you can imagine that it can be done much more sophisticated. Then, of course, you can say something of the map type. What kind of map type did we use? Okay, we use a choropleth map. What does it do? So you give a definition. Could be from the glossary, for instance. But you could also give them a warning. That when they look at the classification, that, and you all know about it, that the classification you choose decides the pattern. The number of classes you choose decides the pattern. So it's so easy to have a completely different story of the map, a different spatial pattern, that people should be aware that choices have been made, I guess. And that's the same with the re-expression. Now you have a choropleth map, but of course there are tools available to swap to another representation. Or you play with the timeline. You order it. And maybe according to time, but you could also order it based on attribute values or something like this. So you should, I think, help explain what goes on. Another map. And this is about the story and the ethics in this particular case. So we look at 2G mobile networks. When I looked into the indicator, I thought 2G, does it still exist? But yes, apparently. Actually, sometimes here I have 3G or E even, so I think that's even less. So this 2G. Okay, but you see this map, and then you can tell the story. Look, it looks as if most of the world is covered by 2G, and that you will have reception everywhere. But this is related to proportion of the population with access. So in places where there is no population, there is not necessarily access. And the country is still colored as if there is 100% coverage. So again, do people realize this or not? And of course, I realize if you want to make a map and you have to go through all this and tell all this, that's quite a hassle. I mean, I don't have a solution for this. It almost reminds me about metadata. When metadata were introduced, we were, let's call it, forced to write about this metadata on the data. And sometimes the metadata report was bigger than the data set. And then people, well, do they still do it? I mean, okay, that's a different story. We can only tell one story at a time. And of course, about the map ethics, I think it's always good to tell the source of your data. So in this case, I refer to the SDG database, and I also refer to the metadata file behind the indicator, where the whole discussion, sometimes it's 6 pages, explaining on how the indicator number has been created. And also you should, for instance, in this case, in the world map, say something about the map projection. Which choices have been made? What does this map projection do? And what it doesn't it not do? I think these things are of interest for the user. And of course, there could be other ethical things as well. I mean, nowadays, of course, we have big discussions. And if then a white man, an old white man like me has made the maps, then it's wrong by definition. Eh? I mean, these discussions are there as well. And yeah, maybe it's true. I mean, I've been trained in a West European environment, and yeah, that puts a certain perspective on how I look at the world. Yeah, and yeah, that's it. Okay, I happily realize this. At least I hope I realize this. But sometimes you probably fall into the trap of your normal habits. So again, maybe that should be part of the story. I mean, we could talk on all these topics and discuss this very extensively. Okay, the last map. I come back to this asymmetric map problem, because again, yeah, we can project the data, and in this case it's undernourishment, and then yeah, you can argue, okay, it's a quarter plate map. Again, you can give the definition, but you can again give a warning and say, okay, look, the distribution of, if it's population related, is not homogeneously over the whole area. And I always use Canada as an example, because Canada is huge. It gets one color in the map, but most people live in a very small corridor near the US border. But in this particular case, it is similar in the sense that if you then would have ancillary data available and you would project it on the map, maybe through transparency or whatever means that are available, then you might think, okay, maybe I have to do something, because the story behind this is that most people yeah, live, especially in Niger and Chad, live in the south of the country. And then you can tell why and so on, the climate and whatever, and the landscape. But then it's maybe good to re-express your map and make a asymmetric map. And then again, look at the data, and then you get other numbers. So the numbers of Chad and Niger, they go up a little bit because it's smaller areas, same number of people. So again, yeah, these are some of the ideas related to this open map knowledge. So somehow put our cartographic knowledge in. And of course, this is the story. Let's say the map is there and you tell, but we had also several presentations of some commissions who are working on standards and others who tell the story from, can I automatically create the maps using our knowledge? So there are multiple ways, and that's also interesting. And so there are very, very, very interesting developments still. So our discipline is certainly not that. We still have lots of work to do. No worries. Okay, so my idea, offer interactive annotations. And that's a first option on how we can integrate this knowledge in a map. But of course, questions. Because I now selected 5 categories. And for each of these categories, you can still think of, okay, maybe there are more. And maybe we should group it differently. So what kind of knowledge should we offer? And of course, that will be context dependent. That's also obvious. But then again, I've now hand-drawn 3 maps. But you want to automate this, because if you have to do it manually all the time, that at the end won't work probably. And then again, if people have all those annotations, do they still see the map? And at one point I looked at a website, I think it was the NASA, and they also had somewhere on a map, they had a short explanation, a long explanation. So you could get an explanation of the map in short story or in a long story. And it was more about the pattern we would observe. So yeah, I mean, this is not the winner, but hopefully it brings us a bit closer. So that brings me to some, oh, my slide is already, Okay. I go back one because here I see more. Okay. My slides are stuck. There are only 3 slides left, or no worries. It's nothing is happening. Here it moves, but not there. Could be that someone is behind the time button. President is not here, but he is. Sharing is blocked, so you have to give me the rights to share, please. It's still grayed out, so. I mean, with this hybrid situations, you don't get that nervous anymore because all things happen. But we have a technician working on the problem. That's always comfortable. Huh? So we have. Well, I'm already almost finished with the video. Okay, we are restarting it on this end, so it takes a while. I have to fill in a few codes. Just to let you know what I see a rotating circle on my screen. Often that's not good news. Think. 7. Check the numbers. I open station. Sorry. See this. Well, otherwise, I'll close it by talking. It's okay. Okay, so it seems that restoring presentation is a bit problematic at the moment. So what I will do, I had 2 slides left. I just tell you what is on this slide. So basically, with open map knowledge and all these things you have to introduce into map and the questions like, okay, how do I do it and who is doing it and what is going in? My next slide was about map AI, so maps and artificial intelligence, and to see how that might help us. And there were a few questions on my slide, like, okay, what is then this map AI? Because do we know? I mean, everybody talks about AI. How does it relate to cartography? And also then the critical cartography and this ethics comes in, because this map AI is AI, deep learning and all these things, all black boxes. Do we trust them, and can we trust them, and should we trust them? All these type of questions. And then I said, okay, that will be my next keynote. And then at the end, I ended with that's a pity that you can see that, because I started with the stamps of the SDGs, and SDG number 13 is the only stamp on climate which has a map on it. That would be my closing slide. So sorry, with this, I cannot show you this because of the technical hiccups. But I would like to thank you then for the listening. And just to let you know, online there were about 70 people. And in the room there were about the same number. So that's quite nice. Here in 4 minutes, the next sessions start, I believe, or is there a break now? I have no, There's a break. Okay, so I'm willing to answer questions. So again, if there are people who would like to ask questions, I'm here. I see one hand raised, so maybe we should bring the microphone along. And again, if there are people online with questions, you also somehow have to express, wave, or whatever, switch on your video, then I can see, and we could discuss. And I cannot operate it because everything is in Italian, so in the menu. So.
All right, thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. I especially liked the last part about the open map knowledge. But I kept thinking, especially with today's technology, where almost everyone can make maps, if there also could or should be an open map making knowledge of some sort.
Yes. Okay, but yes. So your question is, okay, we have knowledge to use the maps, but knowledge to make the maps. And as I told you, there are a few presentations have been in the conference which were related to several commissions on, and now I have to remember, semantics and open source, and those commissions, they had a presentation together, and there they, in cooperation with the OGC, they were introducing some ideas how automatically through all kinds of schemes you could generate these maps with the cartographic knowledge in it. Yes, but that reminds me of things which happened many years ago, and they were expert systems. An expert system also promised to put all our knowledge in a system, and that you would then automatically generate, based on the data, the right things. It never materialized, really. And now again, of course, I mean, history repeats, but always slightly different. Now, of course, we come with this artificial intelligence, with all the technology and the power of computing we have available. So there's a new chance to see, again, will it work? We have this art part. I mean, yeah, that's the beauty, but we have to see. But I agree, it would be nice if that could be done. for mass mapping, so to say, but for very specific things, I think the creativity of us is still needed.
Thank you very much, Menno-Jan. Very inspiring talk. I was wondering about something that you also mentioned as being talked about everywhere, and I was also aware of that, namely storytelling. And I thought that especially the SDGs could be something that could be nicely conveyed with that metaphor of that method of storytelling, because I think this somehow goes to the very heart of the people and attaches them or attracts them and gets them convinced instead of only showing a plain map or something like that. So where do you see the challenges in this storytelling business?
Okay, so we know a lot nowadays about how we can tell stories from a technical perspective. I mean, again, Rob published quite a bit about it, different approaches, and we learn from what happened in other disciplines before, so to say. Technology is made more available. Again, story maps, in my view, again, I go back many years, then when multimedia cartography popped up, in fact, they were the first story maps, and one of the commercial companies picked up this keyword story map, and I will not say they claim it's theirs, but they have a tool available which makes it easy for people to create them. But I think at the end, the problem will be to tell the story. I mean, we cartographers, we can create the maps, the diagrams, we can maybe make a story map, but we need the knowledge of, let's say, what's behind an SDG to tell the story. So it's a collaborative effort. It's not that we cartographers can save the world on our own. And we have to reach out, we have to work together, and then, then we should do it. There's no other choice. We have to save the world. Any online questions? I see 1, 2 persons. Give the word to one of. Okay, you can talk. Please try. But yeah, I don't hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually have one remark and one question. The one remark would be that as a cartographer, I'm not sure if I would agree that everybody can make maps. I think everybody thinks they can make maps because I saw quite a lot of low quality maps made by non-cartographers. So that's my remark. My question would be, if we go to that map, unfortunately you can't show us because I guess the technical problems, where you had Chad with the 3% forestry. Now, obviously, that's a very radical example of where it can be misleading, but how much do you think is it a problem that many people cannot read maps? And do you think that we should start educating people and also reading maps, not just in us trying to make maps that we assume they can read?
Yes, I think if I understand well, you also point to, let's say, educating the map reader.
Yes, exactly. Because
and
example,
of course
that question of Chad, that would be a typical.
Yes. No, again, and that's the nice beauty of this conference. We had many talks also about how atlases could be used in schools and what kind of methods and techniques the teachers could use, and how to train the teachers, how the pupils could be activated, and so on. So there's again lots of research ongoing, and of course, we also debated is that let's say the geography education in many countries is not priority one, and that then hinders a little bit in how easily we can reach the people to educate them, of course. But it's certainly true. I mean, we have to think of the map makers to educate those. We have to think of the map readers to educate those. We have to keep educating ourselves. I mean, we live in a long life learning environment, I would argue, because every time new technology pops up, which we might be able to use to improve our work, not only technology, but also the theory is expanding. We can learn from other disciplines. I mean, again, it's a continuous process. And that's what's happening here at this conference right now. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer.
There's one more question online.
Yes. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Thank you for interesting research. I know some new information for me, and I have some questions. We know that the International Standardization Organization and OGC, Open Geospatial Consortium, don't have yet the standard of artificial intelligence for spatial data. And can we use the tool, for example, or some another instruments for artificial intelligence for mapping, and how related relate the open mapping knowledge and artificial intelligence in cartography?
Yeah.
Because I don't know this relation, because we don't have some information about this new concept, and I will glad for this, for your answer.
Yeah. Okay. I think your questions are also partly my questions. I mean, the slide I had on artificial intelligence had many question marks. Every line had a question mark, because it's a keyword which is being used a lot. But do we know what it is? Do we have any idea? So again, I think there's lots of work to be done. When it comes to the OGC, it's also clear they have many standards, and ICA is a member, but we could be more active there to influence them. Because if you discuss with them, you can also include your ideas in the new standard, so to say. So, but there's a long path to go. We have people active there, but it can always be better. So your questions are partly questions which are very relevant, but there are not yet answers. Okay, I see one more question in the room. I'll first there, and then I come to you. Mark.
So Menno-Jan, thank you for the presentation. I think you've given us some things to think about. My question is on the base of knowledge. There's been, I think it's a good idea. The question is, how do we make it available so people are aware of it? Because I've seen this a number of times. Yesterday, we had the National Mapping Agency Day. And in previous years, actually, in that meeting, there was a challenge to create a knowledge base. It got picked up by a couple of organizations. Ultimately, the United Nations, the Global Geospatial Information Management, created the knowledge base. But most people don't know it's there. It's maybe most people here may not even know it's there. So if we spend the time to create this base of knowledge, this cartographic, base of knowledge, how do we promote it and make sure people are aware of it?
Yes. Well, we could be, as ICA, we could play a role there, of course, to communicate this. But often, of course, we might be be a bit too much inward looking, in a way. So we communicate here among each other, and who outside our community is aware. So again, the UN, where we also meet with other related sister societies, in the ICSU, where we talk with all kinds of other scientific organizations. These might be pathways to follow to spread the news, so to say, but also our user base, so to say. Okay, yeah, thank you. Then you had a question.
Thank you. Thanks for a very inspirational presentation. I have a little remark, and that's with cartography. It's my opinion that sometimes the map isn't the best representation of an indicator. So I think that we also, as cartographers, have a responsibility of assessing whether the map is the best way to explain a pattern or a process that's going on, or progress towards the SDGs. So that's one way of motivating why we represent this at a map and not as another way of visualizing data or
Yeah.
progress. And so motivate the map, that which would also make it easier to have the reader interpret the map, I think. So that's an important thing,
I think
as well.
that's true.
It's painful for a cartographer to say that maybe the map is not the best way.
There is enough for us left over to do. I think because that's also one of the reasons that in the book we had 5 sections on diagrams, for instance, because there are many ways to express the data, and often the combination then makes it understandable, because I really believe in multiple perspective view on your data. On the one hand, maybe through different map types, but also including diagrams, and why not with other visuals, so to say. So yes, that agree. Okay, so I think, not that I'm not willing to answer questions, I'm certainly willing, but then again, time is passing. So I think I will close then this session. And I would like to thank also all the online people who have been listening. And sorry for the technical hiccup at the end. I have no clue why this happens. But then again, thank you very much and enjoy the remainder of the conference.